Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak again. And what I'm going to talk about is aquarium substrates. Now, this subject has been going on for a long time about aquarium substrates and what to use. Most people like to use sand, and a lot of hobbyists will admit the only reason they use sand is because of it's inexpensive. It can be bought at pool supplies. It can be bought at hardware stores. But I want to read you something, some excerpts from a magazine, Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine, written over 45 years ago, 1979, about substrates. Now, everything that people talk about substrates today were already known about 45 years ago. Think about it. That's longer than a lot of hobbyists have even been alive that are in the trade. They already knew about different substrates and what they do and how they react. So it's nothing new when people talk and try to pass on to people how substrates react when 45 years ago they knew it wasn't true. And I'm going to read you an excerpt out of this. And it's talking about gravels, and it's for beginners. And of course, remember, this is written 45 years ago. Finer gravel such as number 1. Now, gravel used to go in numbers. You had number 1 that was very fine, and I think they went up to like 7 or 8. And 3 was about the middle of the road, which was about 1/8 of an inch, 125 thousandths of an inch in diameter, which you can buy substrates today that fall into that category. A lot of your substrates that you add for plants are about that size. They're round and they're about 1/8 in diameter. So that's been known to be about the optimum size for a substrate for our aquarium. Like I said, they knew that 45 years ago. It says, as a number 1, which is most often seen as a coarse white silica sand, often causes a similar problem, but in a somewhat different way. Such fine gravels tend to pack down after a while, and this tends to cut off water circulation through the gravel, which in turn cuts down on the amount of oxygen reaching the beneficial bacteria in the gravel bed. This gives rise to the proliferation of anaerobic bacteria, bacteria that respires without oxygen. And these bacteria produce, among other, poison hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs and kills the fish. When this happens, the gravel begins to turn black. So not only does it smell bad, but it looks bad too. Have I not mentioned this? Now, isn't it funny that they knew 45 years ago about using sands in aquariums, and today it's all of a sudden a magical substrate that people are using? But it's only because it's inexpensive and people insist upon using it. Using a number 3 gravel, which is about 1/8 in diameter, I've had aquariums set up for 5 years or more without even having to break the aquarium down to clean the gravel. Now remember, in 1979, they were using under gravel filters and plenums. That was common knowledge back then. Okay? Gravel was not just thrown on the bottom of aquariums. Under gravel filters or plenums were used back then, and everybody used them. So when he's talking about having aquariums up for 5+ years without ever having to clean them, they were using under gravel filters back then. It says, having to break the aquarium down to clean the gravel. When I've had reason to break these aquariums down, such as when I wanted to create a new setup, though stirring of the gravel in the tank produce little or no foul odor at all. So what he's trying to say is even after years of being used, using a plenum or under gravel filter, there were no foul odors like that of the sand that was placed at the bottom of the aquarium. And they were still sweet smelling. Now, a lot of times you may get a smell like in a basket or something like that, but it's just what I call a pond smell. You know, it's not an anaerobic smell where, wow, you know, that's bad. It smells like a pond. So some people may call that a bad smell, but you got to remember this is written 45 years ago. Now, I'll read you another part out of this magazine. It says, fine coral sand is often sold to use in marine aquariums. Coral sand would be the same sand as a lot of people use in their aquariums. Exact same. It is an excellent pH buffer, but it can be dangerous if under gravel filtration is used because it will pack down even harder than the white silica sand mentioned near the beginning of this article, and will completely block any circulation through the filter. Some hobbyists use it strictly for a decorative effect as a light covering over a coarser substrate. This is okay as long as no more than half an inch or so is used. Now, that's the same thing I've been saying. If you're going to use these fine sands, and I know everybody's already bickered about how many millimeters the sand size is, between 1 and 7 millimeters of diameter, these sand size are. But if they knew 45 years ago that these things pack down, and then if you would use a under gravel filter, and remember back in 1979, when they used under gravel filters, they didn't use them the way I'm telling you. By then, they were already using power heads, and they were running under gravel filters with 150 gallons per hour per uplift tube. So they were really pulling the water down. Not that you had a big, 3 foot or 4 foot tank with one little bubbler just to move fluids through. So the sand or your gravel wouldn't pack up. By this time, already motors were being made. I think in the same magazine, they may even show, yeah, they do. Here, look at this. They already were showing, if you could see, motor being used on an under gravel filter. They were already going to motors now that would pump. I wonder if this one says increases flow rate up to 10 times. Let's see. And it says, oh, here. It says convert it to a motorized unit at 200 to 400 gallons per hour. One of these motors would use. So that shows you that during this time period, we were already changing from the 1-inch uplift tubes with bubblers that would put out 100 gallons an hour through each uplift tube to motors now that are pumping 200 to 400 gallons an hour through an uplift tube. So you can understand a lot of water was going through the substrate. That was completely wrong. That's what I'm showing you. It was never meant to be that way, but that's what happened to the plenum or the under gravel filter. The under gravel filter is basically a plenum. But I wanted to read this on people who have substrates that wind up using very fine substrate, like a number 1, which would be your sands, how they compact, even if not used with a under gravel filter or a plenum, because they knew it 45 years ago. What changed? what magic happened where if you used the number 1 or number 2 gravel, which was then bigger, the number 2, I didn't like the number 2 very much. I prefer the number 3 myself because the number 2 was a fine gravel, and it was so fine that sometimes it wouldn't hold your plants down. You know, it just seemed to not have enough weight to it. But I don't even know if you can find that kind of gravel anymore. But there were no additives to the aquarium when you use these gravels or for your substrate, sand or gravel. So sand is nothing new. But what they found out 45 years ago, that it did compact. And this is what it did. No matter what anybody tells you out there, 45 years ago, it was written in Tropical Fish Hobbyist and Marine Freshwater Aquarium. It's written that using such substrates that are very, very small, except for decorative purposes, over a coarser gravel for looks. So you use a coarser gravel, then you put your sand on top of that, maybe like a ½ inch or something, was for decorative purposes only. It was not to be ever meant to put 1 or 2 or 3 inches of substrate or more into an aquarium because it caused problems. Now, you probably understand why some advocate that you use a lot of plants to put in the substrate to try to keep oxygen in the substrate so it doesn't turn black. But you got to remember, not everybody is going to put at least 75% of their tank full of plants. I do not have, let's say in my Lanai aquarium or any of my other aquariums, full of 75% rooted plants that go into the substrate. I do not have that. In fact, in the tank behind me, Innovative Marine 15-gallon, there are no substrate plants in that aquarium. And in the little 6-gallon underneath it, there's maybe 3 little bitty crypts in that substrate, and that's it. Like in the Lanai aquarium, it can't be more than a handful of little bitty crypts that are in that aquarium. That's it. So what does a hobbyist do then if you're trying to use some of these substrates like a grade 1 in your aquarium and you're not really set up to have all those plants? I cannot put a lot of plants in that Lanai aquarium because it has goldfish. And goldfish are just going to tear those plants up and eat them if they can find it palatable for them to eat. They'll just rip up any plants I put in there. I've tried putting some plants in there, and that's what they do. They just rip them up, trying to eat them. So I wanted to do this video to let you know that if 45 years ago we already knew the troubles of what these substrates can cause, how they would pack down through the years, and what problems they ran into 45 years ago, why is today any different? What magic have we done today that changed from 45 years ago? You're still using the same substrate, the same number 1 substrate that you did 45 years ago. So what, the bacteria had changed now? Things don't get packed down like they did 45 years ago? Guy writes an article and lets you know that, with the number 3, he's never had really any problems after years and years and years of being set up. Even if he ever had to change the substrate or move it around to reorganize things, he never even had a problem with the substrate causing any kind of problem of smell, such as rotten eggs. So it's something to think about that people don't bring up. The very old way of thinking is not the way we think today. Now we know it exists. It's been written about 45 years ago. We know it exists, but why is it they keep lying to hobbyists that it does not exist when we knew about it 45 years ago? Why? Why the big lie? Or is it that because we are now using so many plants and we've changed over to planted aquariums that we are able to get by using these very tight substrates such as sand? And I do understand why people use it, because some people have admitted, I have a big tank. If I used any other kind of gravel or substrate, it would cost me hundreds of dollars in substrate when I can buy a few bags of sand for, 20, 30 bucks. So we know why you're using it, but you still have to have fluids go through the substrate. You still have to have fluids move through the substrate. And if you have an aquarium, let's say that has geophagus, or you have an aquarium that has Oscars or goldfish or any kind of fish that may rip up the tank or change its topography, then you're going to have a problem. And that problem needs to be solved, which when they used Plenums back a long time ago, they put a screen or something there, filled the rest of the tank up, and if the fish dug, it could only dig, let's say an inch into the gravel. Hit the screen, that's it. You're done. You can't dig anymore, and you wouldn't bother all that bacteria. And as you found out through my videos, especially the video I did about 2 videos ago where the power went out, canister filter stopped. The only thing that was there to help solve the fish's problem was a bubbler. Okay, because you could imagine if I was using a sponge or something else, and with all those fish in it, wouldn't it come out perfectly fine than using the entire substrate of the aquarium for biological purposes? And nothing happened. In fact, the fish were spawning and everything else, and they didn't care if the power filter was running or not. It did not cause any ammonia problems or nitrite problems or nitrate problems because the Plenum took care of all biological filter and filtration for that aquarium just by itself. And that's what saved the fish's life. And remember, during that same time, they were being fed a lot of food, and that never stopped. So I wanted to bring that out, that it's kind of like food for thought. Why all of a sudden it's okay to use like a number 1 substrate and throw it on the bottom of your aquarium when we knew 45 years ago that was not good? It was not something you really wanted. It's something that you have to keep open, as my video on the Florida aquarium, public aquarium, said. We use a number 1 substrate, but because we don't have the fauna and we don't have the animal life to keep it open, we have to stir it up 3-4 times a week. Keep it stirred up for our saltwater aquariums. Otherwise, we wind up with an ammonia problem. What's so hard to understand about that? Why is it all of a sudden so different today? It isn't different. We knew the problems 45 years ago and older. We knew what they were. We knew how to solve the problems. And yet today, only because of money, because it is cheap to buy sand, is why things have changed. And the whole attitude of people has changed only because of one thing: the cost. The wherewithals don't want to be spent on a substrate. We want to just hurry up, video after video, throw a substrate on the bottom of our aquariums and say, we call it a day. Not thinking that fluids are not going to move unless you fill that aquarium full of plants. So this video is kind of like food for thought. If you think about it, it's food for thought. If we knew these problems 45 years ago, why all of a sudden are they magically gone? By doing the same mistakes. They haven't gone. We're just making up excuses today. So until next time, this is Dr. Novak. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you like the content that I try to give you. I'm trying to educate you a little bit on why things have changed, which they should not have changed, why they got ruined, and why we're doing still the same things as we did 45 years ago that did not work then. And unless you're going to use plants, they won't work today. So until next time, happy fish keeping.